Hi, I'm attorney Casey Walker. I'm the founder of VA Disability Group. I'm a former VA disability adjudicator, and I'm an attorney. Today I want to discuss Senator Doug Collins' recent testimony before the Senate. Specifically, I want to hit the high points as to what he was trying to, the macro as to what he was trying to discuss with Senate. And then I want to hit some of my interpretations and insight that I gleaned from it. It's about a 2.5-hour testimony. So let's jump right into it. For starters, he wanted Senate to know that efficiency and accountability were his primary concerns under the next 3.5 years under the Trump administration, that he wants to streamline and build out efficiencies in the VA. He wants a leaner, more efficient VA. And that goes with the VA healthcare system and the Veterans Benefits Administration, which is your disability and your other benefits, some of your ancillary benefits. So maybe one of the concerns I have here is that that's well and good that this administration has these desires, but with the next administration in 3.5 years, are we going to see an undoing of all of these things? And you kind of get this ping pong ball effect where you got these policies moving back and forth, and the veterans are ultimately the ones holding the stick. They're the ones who are ultimately affected by these different administrations taking extreme measures within an administration like the VA, a massive administration. That affects their healthcare, so these aren't trivial things. One of the things he gave the Senate assurance of was that only non-mission essential VA employees were going to be dismissed. Well, what's a non-mission essential VA employee? Essentially, people who are not providing direct care to the veterans. We're talking to VA healthcare at this moment. But Secretary Collins provided assurance that only those individuals who do not provide direct care are at risk of losing their jobs as they build out a more efficient government. So one of the concerns here is you have schedulers, you have other people who provide critical services to the veteran who might not provide direct care. But what happens when you remove them is now you have direct care providers doing more of the scheduling. Now maybe we can incorporate AI and some computer technology to help streamline efficiencies. However, I do foresee a heavier burden falling on the direct care providers. Some of the implications are you might see direct care providers leaving, and they're already struggling to hire healthcare providers on the direct level, meaning nurses, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, medical doctors, and DOs as well, and ophthalmologists, optometrists. So all of the direct care providers, mental health providers, psychologists, psychiatrists, those types of individuals might feel overwhelmed if they get rid of some of their support staff. Another consideration that Secretary Collins addressed with the Senate was that they're going to remove non-mission essential roles, such as some of the DEI and interior decorators and roles like that. Now, a lot of these roles are contracted out, so we'll have to wait and see when and if they actually publish those contracts or termination of such with the private sector. But to the extent direct VA employees, government employees, hold those roles, he's essentially telling the Senate that those roles are going to go away. Maybe they can move those employees to other positions, or maybe their roles will be terminated. So on a positive note, he did tell the Senate that the 2026 budget is going to include a 4% increase. So that's pretty substantial. Now it appears most of that increase is going to go to the VA healthcare sector. They're looking at increasing the budget and decreasing some of the non-essential roles. So it's possible you could see improvement within VA healthcare. Secretary Collins did state that $14 million would be saved by getting rid of these DEI programs. Now, I'm not here to discuss whether we should have DEI programs or not, but the monies from those programs, he stated, we put into the prosthetics department. You could have individuals with severe injuries receiving maybe additional care, so potentially that's a net positive for those individuals needing the prosthetics. Some other things that he alluded to were healthcare options. He, under the CHAMP Act, wants to ensure that veterans can seek the healthcare from the providers that they desire within the parameters under the Mission Act. Another thing that he's going to enforce is bringing back remote employees. Now again, this is largely VA healthcare, but this also stretches over and extends to the Veterans Benefits Administration. But the Secretary is saying enough's enough. You guys got to come back to the office and work. And I personally don't have a problem with that. To the extent someone's ill or has a need to be working from home, then maybe we make exceptions, which I suspect the government will do. But as a general starting point, I think it's good to have healthcare employees working in the healthcare facilities. So I do applaud that. Another thing the Secretary referenced was that we're going to have a record number of disability claims being adjudicated. Now, as a former disability adjudicator myself and someone who's kind of studied these statements, they can be a little deceptive. And I'm not saying Secretary Collins is being deceptive here, but it's possible. And here's what I'm getting at. It's not uncommon for the Secretary to report to Congress record numbers of adjudications have happened under their administration. But when you start digging in and you start looking under the hood, what you have are adjudications adding a dependent, or adjudications removing an dependent, or adjudications to change an address or update a banking information, and they treat those as adjudications. And so it bolsters their numbers of adjudications, and then they go and they report that to Congress. We got to define what adjudications are and what disability claims are before we really start boasting about the improvement of such. However, I would say it's a good starting point when your goal is to reach a record number of disability claim adjudications. So an immediate takeaway watching this testimony was the right versus the left, the Republicans and the Democrats. And the Republicans are applauding in the corner, the Democrats are down there boo-hooing everybody, and it's just comical. You get this gamesmanship no matter which administration's in, and I think we got to look past that and really try to focus on the objective things that are being stated, and then how they're defining these things, and then holding them accountable. I think the partisanship, bipartisanship, we got to move past all that. But that was notable. We got Secretary Blumenthal and Secretary Angus King there were some heated moments. I do applaud veterans being defended. However, I also think a lot of your politicians use veterans as a podium or grandstanding to bring attention to themselves, and that goes on both sides. I take these frustrations by senators and congressmen with a grain of salt because sometimes I think they're trying to bring attention to themselves. There was one point in the testimony where Secretary Collins he became adamant and he staunchly defended his actions that were being taken, and he specifically, I quote, says, "I will not let you sit here and scare my veterans and scare my employees." He made that during a heated exchange with Senator Blumenthal, when Senator Blumenthal was levying certain implications of actions being taken against the secretary. Well, let's take a look at that clip.
Because you haven't calculated what it will cost to fire those workers and then reinstate them when the courts tell you, as they will, that they've been wrongfully terminated.
We're talking about less than 1/2%, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ranking Member. You've thrown out numbers of thousands. This is exactly what I'm fighting against. When you use
may be
numbers
a small
that are
part
not
of your
true.
workforce, but they are the physicians.
No,
they are the
surgeons. Mr. Ranking Member, I will not let you do that. I will not let you sit here and scare my veterans and scare my employees, because there's been you must have stuff that, again, you're looking at making a prediction in the future, because no one has discussed firing doctors or firing nurses. We have always said that we're going to keep frontline health care. Now, if we want to continue this message that these are out there when you have no knowledge of what you've just said, except speculation.
Let's begin with
and
facts
innuendo.
right now.
That is facts.
While I appreciate the secretary defending his actions, I think he needs to maybe temper his defense of his actions a little bit, and here's why. When you have 80,000 employees being released and terminated, or 15% of your workforce, I think it's reasonable for all of the workforce to have concerns. And they do fear. So for him to charge someone else with scaring his employees or scaring the veterans, well, when you're making that many cuts, it's reasonable to be scared that you're going to lose your job. And it's reasonable for veterans to be scared that the quality of service will be degraded. I'm not saying these things are going to happen. I still think that the secretary would do well to temper his defense a little bit, because these are significant measures. So I've given you some of my insight as we're talking about the macro issues and some of the things that Secretary Collins discussed during his testimony. I kind of want to provide some of my personal insight and takeaways from the things that I observed, and maybe some of the short-sightedness of certain individuals or things that I would like to have seen more of. So Secretary Collins referenced dramatic workforce cuts. Up to date, I think they let go 2,500 people. There is a court hearing that ordered 1,500 of those individuals to be brought back. So to date, there's been 1,000 employees let go. Now, he has also objectively stated on the record that his goal is 15% of the workforce. So I guess some of the questions I have there is there's a lack of specificity. And he also referenced getting rid of the programs such as the DEI officers and non-mission and essential roles. That leaves a lot of positions that will still be reduced. And he wasn't specific. So I would like to see more specificity when you're throwing these types of numbers out. I think you owe it to the public and to the veterans to itemize it a little bit more and to tell the public which roles you're targeting. Because the DEI and the interior decorators is going to be a drop in the bucket. And a lot of the DEI came from private sector contracts, there's no reason you can't provide specific roles you intend to target beyond just those two. I would like to see more detailed descriptions as to the job roles that they're targeting. Secretary Collins also referenced that there was 538 private sector contracts that were being terminated. Now, he hasn't provided a list of any of those, and Senator Richard Blumenthal and Senator Angus King have both specifically requested a list of those, and the Secretary responded by saying once the negotiations for those terminated contracts are complete, they'll be provided a list. So I understand why you wouldn't provide a list until the negotiations are complete, but I also think that we should be reluctant to promoting those terminations until you are completed with the negotiations, because until it's a completed negotiation, there's no telling whether they'll be terminated to begin with. Contracts have a legal force and effect, and the Secretary knows that. So the Secretary also went out of his way to say there will not be an impact on the quality of treatment and the quality of services provided to the veteran. I think to a certain extent it could be received as disingenuous and maybe hopeful at best, because when you're getting rid of 80,000 people, or that's your stated goal, I think we need to step back and say this is going to have an effect on veterans, especially when you think of the immediacy of it. They're trying to get rid of the 15% of the workforce seemingly overnight. If you do it within a year, that's very fast. And that speed at which you're making significant sweeping changes can lead to a disaster, frankly, at times. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a disaster. I think there'll be an impact despite the assurances. I think you'll see scheduling issues. I think you'll see overburdened healthcare providers that are taking on the task of their support staff that were terminated or let go because of these reductions. And I also think you could also have medical providers leaving the VA because they feel overworked or frustrated. Another insight after watching this is we're talking about a leaner, more efficient VA. But under the previous administration, they promoted and reported overwhelming success with the VA and satisfaction amongst veterans. And so you get in this conundrum where you have different administrations reporting different things on different metrics and different data. Which administration are we supposed to actually accept as telling the truth? What is success even defined by these different administrations? While I applaud a leaner VA that's more efficient, it all sounds great, but actually executing can be a little bit more challenging. But in the end, when we're measuring success, how are we measuring that? Because seemingly every administration touts their success with the VA, but despite every administration doing this, veterans have perpetually been frustrated. So ultimately, is the system broken right now? Does it need fixing? Another impact that I took away is that there's specific programs, clinical trials specifically, where they're introducing new medicines, new treatment approaches. These clinical trials, they cost money. When you're having this type of reduction in the workforce, clinical trials are to introduce new programs. And it appears some of these programs will be reduced. So you're talking clinical trials for maybe groundbreaking TBI or PTSD treatments, and those can be detrimental to veterans. So I could see those being negatively affected. At the moment, these clinical trials are on a 90-day pause. I could see that being extended and maybe extended again, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. At the moment, there's a 90-day pause. So more to follow on that. One thing the Secretary did allude to was that there's ongoing third-party studies of psilocybin research and trials that are underway. And he does give his full support of that. And that seems to align with Robert Kennedy's view as well. So I anticipate that area growing, and maybe we'll see some further development in that regard for mental health, TBI, and other treatment modalities. So I'm optimistic that that area will enhance and be improved in years to come. Another interesting observation is that there's a policy limiting congressional visits to VA campuses. I see two sides here. I want my representatives to be able to go to VA facilities because, after all, there are elected representatives. But back to the grandstanding that I referenced earlier, the VA facilities can't become a tool of marketing for politicians. So I see two sides there. It's probably not a good optic when you're preventing elected politicians from going to VA campuses, but that does appear to be a policy the VA has enacted. Okay, so there was one exchange involving Senator Bernie Sanders where he expressed concern about losing medical professionals, your nurses, your PAs, your medical doctors, your DOs, your psychiatrists, your psychologists, and Secretary Collins communicated that these concerns and these are realities in the private sector too, that this isn't exclusive to the VA. They kind of saw eye to eye here, which was interesting. And Senator Sanders introduced an idea, but he said, have we considered bringing educational programs to the VA where they're trained within the VA. You have something similar. The Department of Defense has a medical school, and you have other programs that are similar throughout the country. And so it was an interesting concept. I know that the Department of Veteran Affairs has a residency program for dentists, but maybe expanding this dramatically into the other areas of medicine could be an option. And so they seem to come to a meeting of the minds, maybe having a tacit understanding that this was a possibility that could be beneficial. So the big picture here is the historical context, and this is partly my concern, is that over the last 50 years, the VA, most people would agree at least, has largely let the veterans down. And so when veterans see a 15% workforce reduction or up to an 80,000 potential VA employees, I think it's very reasonable to fear that and to have concerns about that. And when the Secretary is publicly stating that healthcare will not be affected, maybe tempering those types of statements a little bit would be good, because there's already a general distrust that's warranted. Ultimately, I think there's potential for further erosion of trust, and that's my concern here. So I'll leave you with this summary. The stated goal of efficiency and betterment of veterans care are laudable, but there's potential for significant consequences here, and sometimes those are unintended, but they're felt by veterans nonetheless. I'm hopeful that we can come together as a government and effectuate a more lean government that also does not compromise veterans' care. Perhaps it's incumbent on you as a veteran to get authorizations for your community care now, because if some of those positions go away, it might take you months to get the authorization. Perhaps you want to submit a prosthetics request now, because maybe they're going to reduce some of the people who process the prosthetics requests. Maybe you have plantar fasciitis and you get some foot arch supports or whatever it might be, any type of prosthetic. Put those requests in now, because it might extend the processing time once they actually implement and execute these reductions in the workforce. If you're looking for in-house treatment, maybe you want to see your provider. Yet again, if you're getting rid of schedulers, maybe you should try to get that scheduled now so that you don't have a delay once these reductions are executed. Another consideration would be the clothing allowance. So veterans who have maybe large knee braces, maybe they have a skin condition and they use a lotion, a topical lotion for a service-connected skin condition. Now mind you, these only apply to service-connected conditions, but by August 1st of every year, if you're eligible for a clothing allowance, you have to submit an annual application to the respective prosthetics department of your local VA medical institution. These could be slowed as well, so maybe get your application in as soon as you can for that respective year, because processing might be slowed. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, like and subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.